All right, everybody. Welcome back to now what is surprisingly, officially, episode 3 of the Heat and Light podcast. I am joined, as always, by the remarkable Marc Sessler in Los Angeles. Marc, what's going on?
Conor Orr, how are you? Well, not too much. We are recording this. In the past, I think it was kind of late morning in the LA time that we dive into this. I'd been awake for a certain number of hours. It is about 7:30 or so right now, so a little bit earlier than planned. But, it's a busy day ahead here at NFL Media, so we wanted to dive in as soon as we could.
Yeah, and it's good too because you're just sort of waking up, getting going. I've been up for a few hours, but also I'm sort of coming off a really crazy dream. Just another like fevered nightmare where I show up to a high school football game with no pads on, and this is the fifth or sixth time it's happened, and I don't get my pads in time, and I miss my chance to go into the game, and so I'm still recovering from that. So it should be an adequately crazy podcast for those who do enjoy that sort of thing.
That is fascinating. It's funny. I've had, and maybe this is a typical American male type dream, but I've had a similar thing, and I think I did have shoulder pads, but I was in like a huddle, and like a series of very complex play calls were announced by the quarterback. I certainly wasn't the quarterback, and I was like, I don't even know what position I am. We'd break the huddle. I don't know where to go in the field. I have no idea what we're doing. And so complete and utter confusion. You wake up from that, and the day can only, it's basically telling you are heading into dark chaos today. I think that's what that dream tells you.
I've never had one where I've succeeded, by the way.
No.
Like, there's never been one where I've scored a touchdown. Like athletes say that all the time. Like, oh, I dreamt about scoring the game-winning goal. When does that happen? That never happens for me.
I think those people are just built differently than us. Mine are typically always rooted in like some sort of deep, unannounced failure that is about to come to the surface in real life.
Well, speaking of deep, unannounced failure, we do work, at NFL Media, and our day jobs are sort of covering the NFL. And one of the stories that sort of struck me this week, especially later in the week, sort of Thursday and Friday, was as the Browns were closing minicamp, their number 1 overall pick, Myles Garrett, kind of limped off the field with a foot injury. It initially was reported as being very serious before those things were sort of walked back by some other national reporters, one of them being our own Ian Rappaport. So it got me thinking about some of the craziness surrounding being a Browns fan. I know you and I have gone through it in our pre-NFL.com lives where we sort of pulled for this team, rooted for this team. And there was a moment right there where I thought, wow, this team really is sort of cosmically, deeply cursed. I mean, if that really happened, if he was lost for an extended period of time, what evidence could you have that there are no outside forces affecting this team?
And it's funny, our friend Dan Hansis likes to, I don't know if he's joking or not, it might be a real theory of his, that Berea, that the complex in Berea, Ohio, is potentially built on an Indian burial ground, because it is truly, if you look at the litany of negative incidents, one after the other. So when this was dodged, it's almost like, can you break out of this curse? Was that maybe a little sign against all these other signs that maybe Cleveland is attempting to or going to finally be clear of this? They're not out of the woods yet.
Definitely not. But I think this is a good topic of conversation because this whole theme of kind of this otherworldliness, curses, dark matter fits in well with something that we wanted to get to, and I especially wanted to get to with you on this podcast. One of the fun things that we like to do here is really just explore whatever and sort of get into some of the crazier stuff that we're passionate about on the side. And speaking of ghosts, of mysteries, of all this sort of dark demon stuff, I don't think there's anyone that I know better than you to set up this next story and kind of dive into what we want to talk about.
Well, it's something that occurred right here in Los Angeles. And for LA, you probably would think especially if you live outside of the United States, that Los Angeles is all about Hollywood and filmmaking. And that's certainly like deeply woven into what LA is. But there's an incredible historical roadmap of crime, of strange hauntings, strange murders, strange, very, very eerie cult activity. I would say that Los Angeles is really unmatched by almost any city in the entire country for the eerie ghost-like narratives that are
Hmm.
unforgettable once you get into them. And I think everyone knows about certainly the Manson murders that occurred up on Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring and three others were murdered by the Manson family back in '69. But last week we talked about the potential theories behind Paul McCartney passing away in 1966. There's a preamble to the Manson case that also took place in 1966 and involved Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring, and it's an unknown, it's a relatively lesser known chapter to all of this. That whole thing, the Cielo Drive house, which overlooks the entire city, is up on a hill in Benedict Canyon. Which, if you've ever been to Los Angeles and you've driven up there, it's beautiful. It's quiet little streets, overgrown foliage, wooded backyards, just very peaceful, and a completely different part of LA. But less than a mile away from that is a house at 9820 Easton Drive, and this is where Jay Sebring bought this home in the mid '60s. Do you know who Jay Sebring is?
Why don't you kind of give us just a little bit of a background on him,
Sure, he
just so.
was like the premier hairstylist in Los Angeles at a time when that was a big thing, and all these stars would only go to him. He was Adam West's Batman's hairstylist, appeared on Batman, and he sort of was just inside the industry extremely famous. He started dating Sharon Tate in the '60s before she left him for Roman Polanski. Even after she met Roman Polanski, they remained friends. That's how he was at that house on Cielo Drive on the night of the Manson murders. But he owned this house on Easton Drive, and it had an incredibly eerie background because in the late 20s and early 30s, it was owned by a MGM producer named Paul Byrne, who got married to Jean Harlow, who was a very famous actress at the time. And the long story short, this whole other case. What happened with Paul Byrne? You could spend an entire weekend
Yeah.
and week reading about this. But the upshot is, according to police reports, he shot himself in the head in the early 30s and wrote a very weird note to Jean Harlow, who he'd only been married to for a couple months, essentially sort of apologizing for himself and how much he loved her. And so there was just incredible mystery surrounding that. In that same house, and I've driven to this house, and we'll put a picture. We're going to include it as our icon for this, our avatar for this show. But it's a strange little Bavarian mansion with a little swimming pool in the back, surrounded by trees, and they had it where it has these very wide, strange gutter spouts and these statuettes, and the statues are of famous Hollywood stars like Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Rudolph Valentino, very early to mid 20s silent film stars. And so the house is not changed much. And when Sebring bought it, he loved the idea that there had been strange hauntings and occurrences there. Two other people had died drowned in the swimming pool in the years between Byrne's death and when Sebring purchased it. Now, long story short, first of all, let me ask you this: would you decide to go buy into a home like that? Was that where you'd want to take yourself to live?
Well, especially in kind of doing some research for this episode, I think it was the current owner that I was watching an interview with, and he said that he bought it like extremely below market value, despite market value offers, because they wanted a certain kind of person to own the house and not to be like they were almost hoping to maybe reverse some of the personalities and everything that had been in that house before. So no, definitely not. I'm terrified of ghosts. I freak out every time I go to a haunted house, which is something I still do every Halloween, and I don't know why. And I don't know why I'd ever want to immerse myself in something like that. I'm not lying when I say it was a huge bonus when my wife and I bought our house, and we knew that both of the owners were alive and the original owners, and that they had just wanted to move somewhere else. And I said, great, there's no chance of any sort of haunting or anything like that. So I would stay so far away, but I bet you have a different take on that.
Well, the only incident that I could remember real quickly is that when I moved to Boulder, Colorado in the '90s, it was a large farmhouse that I moved into that sold for very cheap. We were renting it, six of us. It was a group home for a bunch of us friends for about $100 per person a month. So it was like dirt cheap. But before everyone had moved in, this girl and I, Kristen Bowles, a friend of mine, we were in this home for about a month in the summer, and there was certainly a strange feeling to it. Long story short, she had this incident where she at one night had gone from the downstairs room up to the upstairs and flipped the lights off on her way up. She got to the top of the stairs, and the lights downstairs flipped back on. And she said, "Well, what was that?" So she's thinking some electrical failure. She went down, and I am not kidding. This to this day, this freaks me out. The light switch had physically moved. And we went down to the Boulder Library and spent the next couple, because we did not even have jobs. We were waiting for everyone else to get in there. We researched on microfiche and old stuff. This had been a dairy farm back in the earlier part of the century, and there had been a death of a little girl there. And the
Wow.
family had moved out very soon after. So I don't know what to ascribe it to, because I'll tend to be suspicious, and I'm open-minded and want to research it. But that, long story short, that doesn't even touch what we're about to get into, because the house that Jay Sebring bought into with this eerie past, he was out of town, and he was dating Sharon Tate at the time. Sharon Tate needed a place to stay, and she called up and said, "Can I stay at the Easton House tonight?" He said, "Of course." So she was alone in the home. And, it's interesting, because a lot of people in Hollywood thought that she had a strange early movie career, because her first movie that she ever did was this weird sort of demonic possession movie called 13, which they later changed the title to Eye of the Devil. But she was always sort of like cooked into the supernatural. Her friends said that she was interested in it, interested in talking about it, exploring it. And when she was in this home, Jay Sebring's home, alone that night, she had this incredible sense of being terrified, which she said for her was unusual. And basically, at one point, she tried to go to sleep, and she slept with the light on. And this is in an article that was written by Dick Kleiner back in the 60s or 70s, where she basically explained to him what happened was that she tried to sleep with the light on, and at one point, a creepy little man came into the room and sat by the side of her bed. Not a physical man, but the apparition of a man. And in her words, she said he looked like the pictures I'd seen of Paul Byrne, the producer who had committed suicide in that room many years ago. So she ran downstairs, but on the way downstairs, now this is rough. This is a little bit severe. In her words, she said, "I saw a vision of someone tied to the staircase. It might have been me. It might have been Jay Sebring. Whoever it was cut open at the throat." This was in
Ugh.
1966. So she desperately needed a drink. She was looking for alcohol. She could not find any anywhere. And she had this idea, some sort of sense, to go to this old house. All these old LA houses had these secret rooms, and they were built in a way, old European style homes. She had this sense to push on a bookcase, and it swung around and revealed like the in-house bar. And so, you can't make this stuff up. She grabbed a drink, and for some reason, there was the bar underneath it had a wallpaper around it, and she pulled at the wallpaper, and it revealed sort of a copper backing. I'll explain why I mention that later. So then she's like, "I got to get back upstairs and get to sleep." She went back upstairs, and the apparition of either her or Jay, who she could not make out — that's strange that she couldn't — was still on the stairs. And when she went into the room, the creepy little man was still on the bed. And she somehow at some point fell asleep. She woke up the next day thinking it was just a terrible dream. But Jay had come home, and while she was just resting up in the room, he shouted up to her basically, "Who tore the wallpaper off the bar down here?" So it all had happened the way that she had remembered it.
Wow.
3 years later, up less than a mile away on Cielo Drive, in the Polanski Tate house, both of them were taken out by the Manson family in terrible, tragic fashion. So this is a little — I dug into those cases. I had not gotten into this one, though. And the more you get into it, how strange of a situation.
How strange is it that, and this shows how different I am than any of them. But how could you fall asleep after that?
That's my
I
question.
would be I would be up there, and I don't know what I would do because I think I've seen so many ghost movies now where I would know that there's really nothing you can do at that point. I don't have like a fistful of sage that I could light and wave at them. I mean, there's nothing, there's no physical weapon that I could use to protect myself. I'd just be up there just begging them for forgiveness. Sorry for bothering any of you guys. I'm just going to leave and never come back to California again. That's what I would do.
Absolutely. It is interesting that there is one note that she pointed out that the creepy little man was not in any way trying to interact with her. He was pacing around the room at one point, and it wasn't like he was really trying to terrify her or bother her. But naturally, you would be anyways. I'm with you. My gut says that when you say you went downstairs and had one drink, maybe you had enough to calm yourself and get tired enough to crash at some point. But the fact that you're walking up the staircase, seeing that ghost, and then the second ghost is still in the room with you, I don't know. I mean, let me ask you this: Do you believe a story like this?
Totally, 100%. I think that there's no way that the whole like ghost genre as a whole could have ever come about if there wasn't some sort of an organic experience at some point in someone's life that sort of snowballed into what we are now. And I think it's sort of a box that you have to open yourself. That's why I always try to like just completely stay away from it, because I know that as soon as I dig in there, there's going to be this whole other thing that just freaks me out. Like that movie, Paranormal Activity, where some stuff's going on, but everything seems okay. And all of a sudden this guy's like, oh, let me get a video camera and really start to freak this thing out. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, he's dead. His wife like eats him or something like that. But
why are you still living in that home, investigating further, which is always the critical mistake in all these demonic possession, haunting monster movies, where it's like, why are you still lingering at the scene here? Why are you exploring further? And that's sort of why I pointed out that Sharon Tate, Sharon Tate is one person that if you dig into her life, uniformly everyone around her loved her. Like, she was beloved. There was not any sort of a diva nature to her. It was completely the opposite. But there are definitely stories of Polanski being very into the occult, very into the supernatural. And even before she met Polanski, Tate had a little bit of that too. And so I agree with you. I tend to believe her account. At least that's what she believes. It's her perception of it. Do you feel like you've ever had a run-in with the supernatural yourself?
I think so, but it's one of those things where you just don't know. And that, going back to the earlier point, imagine if you had proven any of this, like you spent your life sort of digging down and really nailing down the fact that, hey, there are ghosts, there's something that's in my room. Who's going to believe you? Even if you have ironclad proof, there's still going to be 90% of the country that's going to be like, nope, don't want to open that box, get away from me. Don't want to freak myself out. But I will say, I used to live in this basement apartment in Montclair, New Jersey, and there were a lot of times when I would work all day at my first job where I was working at the newspaper, and I would get home at like 3 o'clock in the morning and not be able to sleep because you're still like revved up from the day, and so you get to sleep at around 6, and then you'd kind of sleep until noon or 1 o'clock, and then go back to work and do the same thing over and over again. I had like a bolt, and then I had like the chain lock, and I locked the whole place up, and I had this crazy nightmare that my third grade art teacher, Mr. Donahue, was coming to get me. And if he's listening to this, I don't even know if I haven't spoken
I'm sure
to him
he is.
but anyway, I enjoyed my time in his art class. We painted a lot of cool things, but like in my dream, he's just wailing on the door, like the door of my apartment, and it's happening over and over, and it's getting louder and louder and louder and louder until I just shoot up, and it's still kind of dark out a little bit because it's the winter time, and everything, like the bolt is unlocked, the door is totally unlocked. Don't know how it happened, and I'm just sitting there in my apartment like, holy hell, what just happened? And so that's when I think if I ever thought about diving into this again, I just sort of just shoebox that moment, and I'm just like, okay, that's a part of my life that I'm never going to go back to, and I'm just gonna live like I'm gonna mow the lawn, I'm gonna make some lemonade, and I'm never gonna think about this again until now.
I think it is time. It is absolutely time for you to start keeping a dream journal. A dream journal by Conor Orr would be fantastic. We've got you, padless on the football field. This dream you've just described is semi-psychotic and enjoyable. So it's time for that. But it is probably also time for us to get out of here because once again we've highly annoyed, I would imagine, the managerial layer above us that thinks we're at our desk typing right now.
Yeah, I think that for a podcast with no common theme, the one common theme is routinely escaping our actual responsibilities.
Yes, it is. And but for no longer, we're going to go back, and then I will be on vacation next week, Connor. But I'm going to find time for us to. I might be parked on the side of a highway somewhere, but we're going to record another episode, one way or another, next week.
The Highway Live would be, I think, that would be like the height of our creativity. So I'm looking forward to it.
We can aim for that. All right, everyone. Well, this has been really fun. Not the kind of conversation I thought I'd have at NFL Media at roughly 8:15 in the morning. But I hope you enjoyed it, and please join us next week.